Hey everybody, welcome back to Classic Spin. Today we have another part in the A.E. Burns' Council of Nicaea series. I believe this is part 7. Thank you for tuning in. I will get the recording playing now. In the discussions of the Great Council, Arianism had been met at every point. Its claim to be logical, its arguments from Holy Scripture, and its appeal to tradition. For many years to come, the support of the Western Church was unanimous. But we must remember that the West was very ignorant of Eastern affairs. Even in the East, the creed became a watchword which remained unchallenged until its chief defenders had been on various pretexts deposed from their sees. And yet, as Guatkin said, in words which have been often quoted, the victory of Nicaea was rather a surprise than a solid conquest, as it was not the spontaneous and deliberate purpose of the bishops present, almost all Eastern it must be noticed, but a revolution which a minority had forced through by sheer strength of clearer Christian thought. A reaction was inevitable as soon as the half-convinced conservatives returned home. This use of the term conservative needs explanation. As Bishop Robertson says, the Nicene party were in a hopeless minority in Asia Minor, and but little stronger in Syria. The indefiniteness of the mass of episcopal opinion justifies the title conservative, but their conservatism was of the empirical, or short-sighted kind, prone to acquiesce in things as they are, hard to arouse to a sense of a great crisis, reluctant to step out of its groove. If by conservative we mean action, which really tends to preserve the vital strength of an institution, then Athanasius and the leaders of Nicaea were the only conservatives. If the Synod of Antioch be accepted, the first part of this statement must be revised. Its list of bishops shows far more support in Asia Minor and Syria for Alexander than we had suspected, and this, if a fact, would influence Constantine. He was more concerned to promote peace than to discover truth. In the light of the new evidence, we can discern the effect of his policy in stimulating a reaction, which if the Church had been left free to settle its own affairs, would never have become so dangerous. The revolution involved in the insertion of the terms "from the substance of the Father" and "of one substance" into a formula of faith intended as a test of orthodoxy for bishops was a revolution in the method of teaching, but not a departure from the old faith. It seems that Constantine called together certain members of the Synod in the year AD 327. Schwartz has shown that Athanasius dates the progress of events correctly from the later session, but Duquesne points out that Eusebius of Caesarea speaks only of an invitation to the Egyptians, who continued in the midst of universal peace to wage war on each other. Eusebius of Nicaea and Theonis, who welcomed party leaders whether Arians or Meletians, and were banished by Constantine, who would brook no interference with his policy, were now restored. We can trace from this date the growing influence of Eusebius of Caesarea, whose learning and eloquence had a great fascination. To him the emperor turned more and more for correct copies of the scriptures, and for advice in his schemes of church building. As a politician, he would not retrace his steps, but he knew that every law gets its meaning from the way in which it is carried out. Since his work of peace at Nicaea did not meet the requirements of the common sense of the East, though he demanded the letter of obedience to the creed, he was ready to sacrifice its spirit. An Arian priest recommended to him by his sister Constantia seems to have been instrumental in securing the recall of Eusebius of Nicaea and Theonis within 2 years. They had, after all, signed the creed, and were required to profess adhesion to its teaching. When Eusebius of Nicaea returned in AD 327, a dangerous intrigue was at once begun to remove the chief defenders of the Nicene faith. Eustathius of Antioch and Marcellus were marked out for attack, and to them was added Athanasius, who became Bishop of Alexandria on June 8, 328. Liechtenstein says that truly, Eusebius and Athanasius became the leaders on the two sides, for Athanasius was the cleverest theological advocate arrayed against him. Athanasius had been Alexander's right hand. As a deacon, he attended the Council of Nicaea and took a prominent part in some of the debates, but his influence there must not be exaggerated. There is no proof that he suggested the term homoousios, although he was always loyal to it. By birth and education he was a Greek in noble thoughts and philosophical insight, an orator and a statesman. Eustathius had been involved in a literary controversy with Eusebius of Caesarea, who was horrified at his association with the Sabellian Marcellus. Eusebius of Nicaea, having flattered Constantine into sending him with Theonis to see the new church built in Jerusalem, was received as a friend in Antioch. But as soon as he reached Jerusalem, he plotted with his namesake and other Arian bishops to hold a synod at Antioch on their return journey, at which they brought a charge of unchastity against Eustathius, which was generally disbelieved, and of course an accusation of Sabellianism. Probably, the decisive charge was a complaint of dishonor done to the Empress Mother Helena. She had a special devotion to the martyr Lucian, and had built a magnificent church in his honor. Eustathius seems to have used indiscreet words. Later on, Ambrose said that she had been in early years a servant at an inn. If Eustathius said anything of the kind, it would be a case of lèse majesté. He was deposed and brought before Constantine, who banished him to Trajanopolis, accompanied by a number of priests and deacons. As Chrysostom says, entombed in the hearts of the people of Antioch. He was a friend of Photius, and it seems strange that the Council of Sardica could do nothing for him. Probably, the political charge was the reason. There was dangerous unrest in Antioch. And when Eulalius, who was made bishop, soon afterwards died, Eusebius of Caesarea was proposed as his successor. He was probably wise in declining the honor, for which he was highly praised by Constantine. But we may gather that he hankered after the position, and his hint that he would have brought them peace fits in with the suggestion that he had been a candidate in AD 324. Eusebius of Nicaea now took in hand the rehabilitation of Arius. His tenacity of purpose was amazing, and his cleverness is shown in his recognition of Constantine's true position. Committed to keep the Nicene formula sacrosanct, while he received back Arius on the strength of general recognition of the synod. So Eusebius wrote to Athanasius to ask him to receive Arius back, but this friendly overture was met by a stern refusal. He then entered on a campaign of slander in coalition with the Meletians. 3 Meletian bishops appeared before the emperor in Nicomedia and accused Athanasius of taxing Egyptians to provide linen vestments. 2 presbyters from Alexandria at once refuted the charge, but the emperor summoned him to Nicomedia, where he was accused of sending a purse of gold to a rebel called Philomenes. This again was refuted, and the emperor went on with a third charge about the broken chalice. One Iscyrus, whom the presbyter Colothus, when he broke away with schism before AD 324, had taken upon himself to ordain, had been then deposed in the presence of Photius. But it was now asserted that he had officiated at a certain hamlet, and that the presbyter Macarius, whom Athanasius had sent to inquire into the matter, had found him in the act of celebration, had thrown down the altar, broken the chalice, and burnt the books. Athanasius had a crushing reply ready. There was no church in the village. It was not the Lord's day, so there was no chalice there, for there was no Eucharist. Iscyrus was found ill in bed, and his father had promised that he would not continue to officiate. Both in person and by letter he had confessed the plot, and then joined the Meletians. Constantine was satisfied, and wrote a letter to the Catholics of Alexandria, denouncing the cabals against their archbishop. When Athanasius had returned home, another charge was made of murdering a Meletian bishop called Arsenius, and of keeping his hand for purposes of magic. A dead man's hand was produced in a box, and the alarm which was generally felt about magic stirred the emperor to summon Athanasius to appear before Dalmatius, a prince of his house, at Antioch. Athanasius sent a deacon to find Arsenius, and he was at last discovered in Tyre, where he was identified by Bishop Paul. Constantine, on hearing of it, stopped the trial and wrote to Athanasius that any further plots of the Meletians would be dealt with not according to the ecclesiastical, but according to the civil laws. John Arcaf, the head of the Meletians, confessed his share in the plot, and Arsenius, having apologized, was taken back into communion with his clergy, and remained loyal. The Eusebians, however, returned to the charge and persuaded the emperor that further inquiry was needed. Athanasius was summoned to appear before a council in Caesarea in AD 334, and refused. The next year, great preparations were made to keep the Triconalia, or 30th anniversary of Constantine's ascension, together with the dedication of his church on Golgotha, and a preliminary gathering was held at Tyre in August AD 335, to which Athanasius was summoned by a peremptory order. He arrived with 48 bishops, and he had other friends, but they were outnumbered, and the Count Dionysius, whom Constantine sent as the protector to the council, did not do much to restrain the disorderly proceedings. The old charges were trumped up, even that of the dead man's hand, but Arsenius was produced alive and with 2 hands. Arcaf fled, but the rest were equal to the occasion, and said, "Magic again." They even persuaded Dionysius to send a commission to the Mariotes to see if they could find out something more about the story of the broken chalice, taking Iscyrus with them. The proceedings of the commission in Egypt were monstrous in the browbeating of witnesses, and yet they could not prove the story. On their return they concealed their minutes, which were sent by the Eusebians to Pope Julius, and he gave them to Athanasius. Thus their treachery was revealed.